this is the grave of Frederick Augustus Thesiger. Notice there's no K on the end of Frederick. So there he's born in 1827 into a British aristocratic family. His father was a politician and barrister who was made Lord Chancellor, as in the highest judge in the United Kingdom. Anyway, so this Frederick Thesiger, his father was ennobled as Lord Chelmsford, or Viscount Chelmsford, because they had estates there in Essex. The Thesigers have been prominent in that county for centuries. Anyway, our Frederick Thesiger, his father was also Frederick Thesiger. His uncle was also Frederick Thesiger, who was a brother officer of Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar. Our Frederick Thesiger went to Eton, of course, was not very academic, and decided to want to be an army officer. In those days, only a minority of Etonians went to university, and about 1% of the population overall. So then he wanted to get into the Grenadier Guards, a very prestigious regiment of foot guards, as in the guards mostly guarded the royal family in London, so they seldom went overseas, only a war where they needed every man they could get. So it was easy for aristocrats to carry on socialising and politicking, being in London if it came to it. But he was in the Rifle Brigade initially. In those days, commissions were purchased, and after some time in the Rifle Brigade, later he got into the more illustrious Grenadier Guards. He was posted to Canada for a while. Latterly, he served in India at the end of the Indian Mutiny, or the First War of National Liberation, as Indians call it these days. He met Sir Bartle Frere, a Welshman who was a colonial administrator of Bombay province, later of Sindh, and later of South Africa. Anyway, he married at the rather late age of 40, Frederick Thesiger, and then he had 6 sons, 2 of whom died in infancy. But he was posted to South Africa in 1877. He's head of the British Army there, and they're fighting against it. He thought that they were no good at fighting, and therefore he thought that any indigenous tribe would be simply a pushover. Well, he had another thing coming. So there were some Britishers who wanted to, as they would see it, simplify the situation in South Africa, really bring the whole of South Africa under Britannic superintendence. So there was a Zulu woman who'd crossed the river into British territory, into the Natal province, and she'd taken up with another man, despite being married. Her sons and husband dragged her back across the river into Zulu land and clubbed her to death with their knobkerries. Now, under Zulu customary law, they're quite within their rights to do so, and they've been careful to kill her in Zulu territory to try and make an internal matter. But anyway, Sir Bartle Frere took this as a pretext for war, and then he issued an ultimatum, which was so unreasonable, it was designed to provoke war. So King Cetshwayo was a wily operator, had watched the expansion of Britannic power with rising alarm, but was careful not to provoke the British, seeing that they'd conquered all before them. But anyway, he simply couldn't give in to this. It would be the dismantling of their social system, about impis, about delaying marriage to a certain time, and Frere denounced the impis as celibate, man-slaying machines. Anyway, so then the war commenced in January 1879, and there was the Battle of Isandlwana, not very long into the war, and Thesiger had taken some cavalry on patrol. He had disregarded the advice from old South Africa hands, from the Afrikaners and so on, to have a tight perimeter to circle the ox wagons. They hadn't even put tools necessary to open boxes of bullets, hadn't made those very available. They were very stingy in handing out ammunition. There also happened to be a solar eclipse, so the British Army, the redcoats, they couldn't see who they're firing at a crucial moment. Anyway, they're way too spread out, and the British had the NNC, the Natal Native Contingent, on their side, as in black tribes who were hostile to the Zulus, but it was a British defeat. And remember, there was the cartoon at the time, and a Zulu warrior teaching the British a lesson: despise not your enemy. And I can't remember who said it. One of the British officers said, we're behaving like we're fighting an army of schoolgirls. We're not taking them seriously. And you have to recognise that they are a formidable foe. Yes, they're very beatable, but you have to take sensible precautions. He divided his forces and he disregarded the expert advice. So he came back to the camp to find that hundreds of his soldiers had been killed. And he said, whatever, I left 2,000 men here. A lot of them killed, a lot of them fled. And there was Coghill and Melville, I think, who tried to save the colours, but alas, alack, without success. So the British were very worried about Natal being invaded by the Zulus. Some of the Zulu regiments who'd missed Isandlwana crossed the river into Natal, attacked Rorke's Drift, They outnumbered the defenders of Rooks Drift about 30-1, but of course the British had firearms and the Zulus almost never did. When they did, they didn't know how to use them. So that was a British defeat. So Thesiger was told to hand over to Sir Garnet Wolseley, an Irishman, but Wolseley wasn't in South Africa, was sailing there. So Thesiger decided he'd better salvage reputation and fight on, which he did. And then he bested them. There was other battles like, oh my God, Eshawa. I used to know the names of one of them. Klabena or something like that. I can't even pronounce them. Govindlovu. I used to read a lot about it when I was little. Anyway, and then he finally got to the capital, Ulundi. King Cetshwayo had tried to parley. He'd sent cattle as a peace offering. Some of his hotheads had turned them back, and they did not want to open negotiations with the British, fight to the finish. They were full of gung-ho and believed that they could best the British, despite the British Army having state-of-the-art military technology for that epoch. Anyway, Ulundi was a hands-down British win, and Cetshwayo's capital was burnt down. Cetshwayo taken prisoner. Actually, the British didn't even annex Zululand at that time. They didn't do so some decades later. There were some rebellions even after that. So Thesiger, he was able to hand over to Sir Garnet Wolseley and sail back to the United Kingdom. But he was made Constable of the Tower of London. He served in various other positions. He died whilst playing billiards at the United Services Club in 1905. So one of his sons became Viceroy of India. His grandson was Wilfred Thesiger, whom I met in 1997, 7 years before he died. Other Thesigers buried around here, you might have noticed. And look, there's Percy Mansfield Thesiger, okay, one of his younger sons, yeah, born 2 years after his marriage, okay, because he's not the eldest son, didn't inherit the title, lived to the age of 90, and so on. So that is the tomb of the guy who was the British commander in the Zulu War, 2nd Baron Chelmsford, GCB, General Commander of the Bath, General Commander of the Victorian Order. You see the honours that were heaped upon him. Colonel of the 2nd Life Guards. Life Guards is a cavalry regiment. And look, his wife, Adria, and so on. So here we are in Brompton Cemetery. It is the place to be seen dead in. Okay, and that's his father, the 1st Baron Chelmsford. You see, it's almost illegible. They really should redo all this. So how fascinating. It's like a park with more. We're going to find out about it. And 5 separate memorials lie buried members of the Thesiger family. Do you see in there? Okay, well, isn't that thoroughly engrossing? So they're a very expensive place to be buried right near the centre of it. Right, and they're the catacombs right near the centre of West Brompton Cemetery in London. Well, thank you for watching my video. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate to PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. I mean, it's hard to believe he's a real human being, and of course he is, and actually occupied physical space, and was just as alive as I am right now, had all the same physical sensations, all the same emotions as everybody else did. Yeah, and then there's that film about him, just called Zulu Dawn, which is about the Battle of Isandlwana. Countries usually don't ruminate on their defeats, but the British made a film about one, and he's played by Sir Peter O'Toole. So that is the end of my video about the 2nd Viscount Thesiger. Whilst he was in Africa, his father died, and he got the news he'd inherited the title.